Hi, everyone. This is Stephen Frew. We're talking about a series of podcasts that we're inventing and creating around an old fairy tale, an old myth, maybe fairy tale, maybe myth. We won't get technical. And we want to talk just for a few minutes this morning about why stories uh, are important and how we use stories in order to teach each other, encourage each other, invite each other. Stories have been always the way we've communicated large bits of experience. We don't just go into analytical detail. We say, "Did you see what happened?" And it was late in the afternoon. My goodness, it was warm. And pretty soon, the person listening to you is being drawn into not only the content, but the feeling of the story. They're being drawn into the weight or the values in the story. So we do that naturally. Just all you do is hang out with a family with a bunch of little children around, and you listen to a 5 or 6 or 7 year old talk about what happened at school, and it's a story. It's not an analytical discussion, not a therapy room. It's a story, and as you get to accept that, you get to see that that's an efficient way to communicate large chunks of experience, large chunks of valuing, and you get to see how we deal with each other long before we get to like an intimate exchange where we're dealing with imagination, we're dealing with the images of being a human being, which is where we actually live, and is actually what was is most important to us is conveyed through stories. So stories give us an opportunity to look at life from the inside out. And we're taking the story of Iron John, which Robert Bly popularized with his work with men, and we're going to use some of those small vignettes within that story to talk about what it is like to live in this world as a man. Like, for example, we just did a one podcast on leaving and launching and what that's about, because in the story, in all many of these stories, the first thing you notice about the heroine or the hero is that they have to leave the context that they were living in, their family or their community or their kingdom or whatever it is. They have to leave the context of that. So the story begins once upon a time. What time? Well, in a time before time, long before this time, in a time that isn't measured by watches on your wrist or the clock at the city hall, excuse me, but is measured in imaginary time. So in a fairy tale, you could say the prince left. It may have taken the prince 10 years to leave, or it may have taken the love scene many years before they lived happily ever after, whatever that means. You have to invent what that means for you. So the story will be compelling, it'll be inviting, it'll probably be challenging, it'll offer new perspectives, new ways to look at life. So in Iron John, we have the prince, the first story. The prince is playing with his golden ball in the courtyard, and that opens to a story about a wild man that has mysteriously appeared by a lake in the kingdom, and that has been some trouble to the king and his family and his people. That's how the story begins. It's a setup. And you, if you're listening to the story, you go, huh, what would I do? And what character do I identify with? Do I identify with the king? Do I identify with the wild man? Do I identify with the prince? Do I identify with the hunter who bails out the pond? What is it about me and about this story? The story ignites your imagination and gets you moving. So we're going to look at the story. We're going to look at some vignettes within the story. We're going to look at what gold is about. We're going to look about what the woods are about. We're going to look about the prince on his way to claiming his own full individuality in the world. All of that will be very relevant to you and the work you're doing with yourself. This is Stephen Frew. We'll see you next time.